probably no secret that I watch a decent amount of anime, and if you've ever spent any time on the internet watching people argue over who is the best waifu, you'll probably know that one of the biggest debates in the English-speaking anime scene is whether an anime is better watched in its original language with English subtitles, or watched with an English voice cast speaking the translation as if they're the original voice actors, aka dubbing. There are pros and cons to each, but with the dub, it can feel more immersive because it's in a language you actually speak.
Cup of tea?
Gaji, I'm a boy.
The intonation and expressions used fit with the subtle social clues your brain is hardwired to be used to, and you can more fully understand the meaning behind some of the phrases. Plus, because it doesn't have subtitles, you can pay attention more to what's actually happening instead of reading, because as we all know, reading is for nerds. Although the consensus as a whole, and the opinion I happen to agree with, is subs all the way, it seems like more often than not, a lot more work is put into the Japanese voice acting, and it just feels so much more true to the original artistic vision of the director and creators. Plus, the mouth movements match up. I used to watch everything in dub, but after not being able to find it for a few shows, I quickly realised sub is the way to go. Japanese voice actors just seem to go all out and put so much emotion into their performances, where English voice actors struggle with the same intensity. It's probably considered overacting, but it just seems to fit with the crazy intensity of anime as a whole. Studio Ghibli especially has some crazy high-profile English voice actors, which do amazing performances.
The Nazis are a gang of hoodlums.
But the Japanese has a charm that just doesn't seem to translate. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Cowboy Bebop, and Afro Samurai also have excellent dubs, probably in part due to their more Western themes and influences, and they can definitely be watched that way. But on the whole, I'd say subs are the way to go. It feels like half the fun from JoJo's comes from the insane over-the-top Japanese voice acting. It would be sacrilegious to watch it any other way. I mean, listen to this shit.
Speedwagon.
One of the most influential things I've noticed about switching from dubs to subs is that the more I watch subs, the easier they are to understand. The easier it is to understand the underlying tone and emotion in the Japanese voice actors, whilst also reading the subtitles. And certain phrases, I'm sure you know the ones, get repeated over and over, leading to a slightly deeper understanding of the Japanese language and culture as a whole. Even though I can't remember anything they actually said, the Japanese voices for the characters I love are still ingrained in my head. I'm not going to pretend I know or can speak Japanese at all, but I definitely enjoy listening to it. Where I think when Spirited Away won Best Animated Feature at the Oscars, a lot of the people that watched it on the back of that success would have viewed it in the admittedly amazing English dub. In contrast, more recently when Parasite won Best Picture, I think relatively few cinemas screened an English dub in comparison to a sub. One of my biggest issues with English dubs is that they're almost exclusively voiced by Americans. It creates this weird situation where although I can understand what they're saying perfectly, at the end of the day, it's still done in a language from a different country. We both speak English, but it still seems off. In fact, this is one of the biggest revelations I had when thinking about dubs. I don't dislike American accents, but they just don't seem as natural to my ear as English voices do. One place where I never considered this dichotomy was in video games. I play and have played a lot of Japanese games, but I never for a second thought about switching the voice acting. I'd rarely seen it discussed, and if the option was hidden away in a menu somewhere, I never really cared to look for it. I just figured the game had English voice acting for better or worse, and played it as it is. I never considered the artistic vision of the performances because I'm an idiot and I just got on with playing the game.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you!
Even where in anime subs are almost always viewed as better, in video games it seems that most people tend to go for the dub. My first exposure to playing games in a different language was actually the reverse of playing in Japanese. It was learning that From Software games such as Dark Souls and Bloodborne were written and recorded in English to begin with, and that the Japanese players actually tended to play the game in English too. It's pretty clear because those games have undoubtedly the best voice acting of any game series ever created.
Canst thou not see the flame flickering once again?
But I thought it was crazy that they went to so much trouble and put in so much detail as a Japanese game developer to make their default voice acting match the European English Gothic fantasy settings of their games. Their work really paid off, and as I said before, their decision to use almost exclusively British voice actors really works well for me. I mean, there's a reason these games are so quotable.
A hunter must hunt.
It's so hilarious to hear Patches voice the McDonald's adverts over here.
Go this way and peep past the broken staircase.
Enjoy a freshly prepared 99p mayo chicken.
No wonder I don't eat there anymore. And this leads me into my first experience of playing a game in a different language. When you first play an English copy of Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, you are greeted with the following message: this title's default spoken language is Japanese. And that shocked me. For the first time in my life, a game straight up told me, yo, don't play this shit in English, you aren't supposed to. And I didn't. Playing Sekiro in Japanese was a huge eye-opener for me. In the first few hours, I switched back and forth a bit, and the Japanese voices just completely blew me away. The sculptor, Owl, and the Tengu of Ashina particularly stuck with me. That gruff, deep, angry old man voice is one Japanese voice actors seem to make sound so awesome every time. I even figured out the Tengu's secret based on his Japanese voice being so fucking awesome and unique. I think the English voice acting in Sekiro was generally good, and I loved how Sekiro himself was Charles from Red Dead Redemption 2, but I can't even listen to it after playing in Japanese. Like, I can't tell what they're saying without subtitles, but I can still understand the subtleties of the emotion conveyed in their performances, and can clearly tell that it's on a similar level to the performances given in the other Souls games. I've even read that their vocabulary and grammar matches the closing of the Sengoku period, similar to how the characters in Dark Souls say, thou shalt and shit. And if that's not worth at least a playthrough, I don't know what is. And it's pretty much a similar trend for me from then on out. The next Japanese game I tried to play in English was Persona 5, and although I thought the American voices were fine, the Japanese ones just felt so much more true to the scenario. In a game about Japanese high schoolers, it just feels so weird to have them speak in American accents, and say shit like, damn, you speak Japanese? Like, serious, as someone from England, I really think it's the American accents that throw me off. It's probably one of the bigger reasons why the internet seems so divided on it. If I was American, the English dubs would probably feel much better. Plus, by playing in Japanese, you can get some really glorious moments when they actually do try to speak English.
It's nice to meet you. My name is Anne Winder.
It really does sound like gibberish in my head, but similar to anime, I can clearly hear the distinct voices of each character. Some of the Japanese voice actors are pretty big names, and I think that they just absolutely nail the personality of each character perfectly. As much as I've been singing the praises of the Japanese voice actors in Persona 5, I did find it a shame that a lot of the dialogue said by the protagonist during battle, and when doing certain activities or saving the game, wasn't subtitled. It's kind of sad that these voice lines, which are said hundreds of times, had no meaning to me. But I suppose it's better than having them be really repetitive. One of the biggest drawbacks of playing a game in a different language is that you have to take your eyes away from the gameplay to read subtitles. It's a concern I can genuinely understand, and even though I didn't experience it playing a really intense game like Sekiro, I actually did experience that problem last year. Nier Automata was one of my favourite games last year, and I think although both English and Japanese voices were great, I eventually switched to the Japanese. The only issue is that the combat is so fast paced and there is a lot of talking during combat, and so I missed some of the dialogue during the more intense battles. The most insane example of sub versus dub in recent history that should affect a lot of people is in Breath of the Wild. I hate to name names, but the English Princess Zelda is such a generic posh girl, with basically no emotion. It's so grating to listen to. In comparison, when I finally switched to Japanese after like 200 hours, the first time I heard her speak, I immediately thought the word princess. She sounds so gentle and refined, but strong and desperate to save her kingdom. She puts so much emotion into her performance. Let's just listen to each of them.
Urbosa, I feel like you've called me Little Bird before. I was wondering where you got that name from.
Urbosa? 以前から聞きたかったのですが、あなたはなぜ私をおひいさまと?
I've heard so many people insult the voice acting in this game, but very rarely have I seen people recommend the switch to the Japanese as a solution. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that on the whole I like to play games in their original language, although I can definitely see why people would prefer to understand the audio instead of having to read subtitles. I think as long as it's not hampering my experience, the original preserves more of the artistic vision of the creators and seems to have more effort put into it than outsourced dubbing. Thank you for Not the Last Time to From Software, and specifically Sekiro for introducing me to subs in games. Thank you to Yu Shimamura for making Zelda sound amazing, and thank you for watching. Peace.
Even the doll, should it please you.